Are you ready for the 2024 property boom? In this episode, we're going to discuss the key factors that are lining up to potentially create another property boom and what you need to do to get ready to potentially profit from it. And at the end, I'm going to be sharing my personal strategy to increase wealth during times like right now. When we're talking about a property boom, the first thing I'd like to break down is to actually understand what I classify as a boom. I personally think that if you start outperforming long-term averages for a number of years, when you start to compound and add that up, that truly can be classified as a property boom. For example, long-term averages in Australia are between 5 and 7%. And so in my opinion, when you start to hover around that 7 to 9%, that's above average long-term growth, which is phenomenal. If you go beyond that and you're talking about 9+% range of capital growth, you start to be in boom territory. And this is something that's really important to understand because in recent years, we have had the luxury as property investors to almost feel like the conditions that have been there that have created large amounts of growth feel like they're normalized. The truth is, it is not normal to hit 10%, 15%, even 9% capital growth rates year on year, or even every year that you buy. And so I think the key thing here to remember is that because we're performing above long-term averages, that if this period does continue, it is still that boom. And even if you take a look last year in 2023, where you look at that calendar year, 2023 had national performance at above 8%. So you're talking above long-term averages and very close to boom territory. And that was whilst interest rates were extremely high, which is, again, pointing out a big myth there. So when you're assessing property booms, the key thing to remember is that property booms are essentially above average long-term growth, or even above that above average number I pointed out before. And so as you're considering this actual episode today and looking at the charts I'll share with you if you're watching it on YouTube, and if you're not, jump onto the YouTube and check us out. It's InvestorKit, where you can give us a like and subscribe to see more videos like this. But when it comes to if you're tuning in, I'm positive that on podcasts like Spotify or Apple, you're going to still hear some of the numbers and metrics around these charts to give you some insights as to what's happening in 2024. So now that you know what could be considered a boom, what are the conditions that drive it? When I break down property market analysis and what has led us to have extremely high accuracy rates from predictions around market movements, which cities will be top performers, and actually which cities are where in their cycle, it's come down to understanding the three core forces of property price growth. And that is demand, supply, and confidence. Now, people label confidence sentiment, but the three key things here are what truly drive capital growth. The second biggest learning I'd like you to have when listening to this episode or watching it is that you do not rely on any analysis that takes 1, 2, or even 3 indicators and decides the fate of the nation in that way. This is the common mistake that many economists fall to the trap of by oversimplifying markets and feeling 1 + 1 = 2, when in property investing, it's more like 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. Right? So there's so many ones to think of the equation. But to be honest, in our metrics, it's actually around 25 major metrics that define where property markets as a country are going to head. But remember, if you take those 25 metrics, they are macro trends for country analysis. And you and I, listening or watching this here, aren't buying Australia as a country. We're not all investing in property through funds. We're investing in a house for ourselves, and that property might be our first, second, third. Look, beyond that, well done to you, but you're not buying all of Australia. And this is the core things to learn when you're analyzing boom conditions and what the trends are ahead. So now that you know there are 25 metrics, and now that you know where they sit in demand, supply, or confidence, your goal after listening or watching this is to be able to not only understand some of the trends that I'm sharing with you that highlight the boom conditions in play, but actually be able to ensure that moving forward, your analysis is never judged by a couple of trends, a singular piece of insight, or someone's opinion who only points out a couple of points. Your job now is to be able to take in deep amounts of data across many factors like I will today and be able to make a well-informed opinion about where your local market, the house you're looking at, or even the national market to boost your confidence is trending for you to make better decisions. So that's the key here as you unpack what's going to be unpacked in today's episode. Now, as we're unpacking this, let's start off where I think is the most important factor when it comes to macroeconomic movements or macro property market movements, and that is local economies. Now, I'm not saying that growth can't happen in areas where there are like higher unemployment rates than usual, but that's just one figure to mention in terms of measuring an economy. But I am here to say that economic drivers, even at local or macro levels, are core things that will factor the movements of markets and the flow on of many other trends. So let's start off with some of the macroeconomic factors in play in Australia right now. In this first chart, I'm pulling up unemployment levels. And when we're looking at unemployment levels, we are at very, very low levels in Australia. Now, unemployment tends to have a negative correlation to what's called job advertisements. So if job advertisements are high, unemployment tends to go down. If job advertisements are increasing, same thing happens there. We have a lot of job advertisements at the moment across the nation, and unemployment rates remain low. Now, it is likely that the trajectory of them, which has been in recent times and will continue, will start to increase. But remember, what's considered good unemployment by many analysts and advisors is circa 4.5% to 5.5%. That's kind of your normal ranges, and anything under that is extremely tight and will usually create inflationary pressures, which we've seen over the last couple of years because there is greater wage growth that tends to follow, confidence, spending, and investments by business. These are some of the trends that happen as a result of that. Now, unemployment, as I pointed out, isn't just one metric that you want to look at and say that's how the economy's going. You want to benchmark that across multiple things, but the unemployment mark and job advertisements are definitely key. So as you're looking at the nation, you're going, well, if everyone's starting to feel extremely confident about the work that they have, or they have jobs, or they're able to get jobs, or there's plentiful advertisements there, this is a great start to being able to say that property market conditions are going to be strong. And that's the starting point of looking at that analysis. Now, if we look at unemployments deeper, there are many markets across the nation that actually have 2 to 3% unemployment rates, or even 3 to 4%, as many markets are actually stronger than the national average. So when you're looking at that, there are going to be markets in between that actually have better rates than others. And so when you're looking at unemployment, the key here is that even if job advertisements, which are falling off in recent times, and unemployment lifting, we are so well above the norm for job advertisements around the nation that it is in a good position to remain resilient. And that is why we've had such a good performance when it comes to house prices at the macro level, when it comes to the actual interest rate rising period. Rising interest rates, yes, they're trying to shake up this trend. Migration coming in also shaking up this trend. But overall, it's been very resilient. And that's the key to remember that gives us a lot of confidence in how we move, operate, buy, sell, hold, all these sorts of things start with our jobs at home. So as that trend is going forward, I expect it to weaken, but it is still very strong and stronger than long-term averages. Now, the next trend, which I've looked at in the past, is actually running through our wage rises, which is a flow-on of this economy. Now, wage rises from quarterly trends were very, very low between 2014 and 2019. Now, during that time, 2014 to 2019, there was no national property boom. There was property booms in a couple of cities, but it was very low in terms of a quantity of cities that were outperforming national averages. And so when you have that lower quantity, that means a national property boom isn't present. Now, it might have felt like there was a national property boom, but between 14 and 17, Sydney and Melbourne were the two superstars and their surrounding markets. So as a weighting and population level, they felt like they were killing it and a boom was in place, but really it was limited to a few cities and their surrounds. This last property boom that's been occurring since 2021 up till now, and for the rest of the 2024 as expected, is very much the opposite when it comes to how many cities are doing well. A lot of cities are doing well, and wage increases have a big part to play in that, because wage increases are a follow-up when it comes to review of economic environment, and we can see that they've been increasing a lot in recent times. And the big trend really kicked off in 2021, post-COVID, but you can see it is higher than it's ever been in the last 12 years. That is huge. Now, the percentage-wise, we're crossing over 4%, and that trend is likely to increase, but for the later parts of 24, early 25, I'd expect that trend to fall off a little bit in the scale of how quickly it's growing and how much it's growing on those quarterly levels. If we're looking at some of the next charts here, we're going to talk about the cost of construction. So I've mentioned this in previous episodes, and the cost of construction is something to look at, and it's interesting on how it works as a dynamic. You'd think that the cost of construction being high is a dampening effect on house prices, and it's not a good thing, but it actually creates many consequences that lead to increasing house prices. And I'll try and break that down for you here. The first thing is if the cost of construction is high, the lack of belief or confidence in it getting to completion is high, more attention turns to established levels of stock. Because established levels of stock, when you buy it, you settle in typically a 4 to 6 week period, so you know you're getting the keys to that house. Secondly, if that gap is quite large, it seems more attractive and those prices pick up naturally. And then the third thing is for those who did choose to build and continue to go on, while just the cost of materials and construction overall being more expensive led to the end price being higher. So therefore you're just paying more, which actually increases pricing, which equals capital growth. Now, it might not mean growth for you because you're paying more, but it actually is growth for the country. And that's what creates a boom. Now, these trends are clearly coming the other way as interest rates stabilize, supply things stabilize. So I don't think this trend will last for a very long time where these construction trends are just that far apart from established. But building trust locally and building confidence locally takes time. People don't just wake up and forget about all the trends of the past of building and think that, hey, it's going to be a breeze to build now because all these charts say that prices are coming back down. That takes time to feed into the mind of the consumer. And then there's also lags because now there's approvals that need to go into place, starts, and then completion. And if you're looking at average time, this can be 8 months for houses, going all the way up to 30 months in some cases for certain unit projects. So that means that you're going to be in a position where you still have some time of this construction lag impact to actually positively impact established house prices and make them higher. So just to recap where we are right now, I've gone through economic trends that are strong from unemployment, wage rises that are very strong, construction as a country is still lagged, and the gap in pricing is going to create established property to still be very popular. And then now moving into supply trends, you can see before I go into supply that we're shaping ourselves for that boom to continue on because we're having all the factors of a strong local market come into play. So as we go into supply trends, this is the biggest part impacting the market. And it's not just supply in one angle. I've pointed out in the past regarding what I call this triangle of supply impact. And this triangle starts with construction supply being low and lagged, which I raised in the last point, then leads to established supply, houses for sale, established listings being extremely low at 30 to 50% even in some cities, below 5-year averages. And then the third and final part is rental vacancy and rental supply being extremely low. And this picture is very important for you to understand. If you actually break this down, you'll realize why there's a big issue with houses coming to the market. The first part is an established house for sale is the biggest contributor to capital growth impact moving forward because it is the largest variable when it comes to changes in supply. We just cannot build at such a large frequency to suddenly flood Australian housing markets with enough builds and enough take-up of those builds. We cannot simply create so many rental houses based on the demand factors that is instantly there's enough rental supply there to create high vacancy rates. It just doesn't happen. But you know what can happen is if that the current houses, over 10 million dwellings in play in Australia, have a large proportion of an uptick in houses for sale that are established, that is the biggest driver of what creates supply and what slows or increases the speed of markets. That is the big change that either comes in as a wave or leaves you dry and saying that there's no properties available. And that makes times challenging in some ways for the vendor if there's too much, or makes times very challenging for the buyer if there's too little. So this is by far the biggest driver. And anyone telling you about construction, this and that, and how we need to build more homes, sure we do. I'm not saying we don't, but there's no bigger driver than the supply shifts that come along. So by understanding the established supply move, I want you to imagine this. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'd love to help you sell your home. Prices are going really well in Australia. Yeah, I know, I saw, right? My house is what, 700K, I bought it 2 years ago and now it's worth $1 million. Lots of money in this one. Been thinking about selling actually. Oh, great. Well, could we consider actually going through what price I could get you, and could we consider, what that would mean for you in that sell? Now, I'm not pitching here, by the way, just to say that this is how a sales agent talks. I'm just giving you the scenario. Like, imagine you're the bird in that room. And they say, yeah, I mean, I could, but this is where we live. I don't really know what to do. Oh, what do you mean you don't know what to do? Well, if I sell the house, I kind of don't want to build because building's so expensive. And my friend down the road, she actually was very impacted by building property. Oh, well, what's the impact? Well, she thought it would be a 7-month project, but it ended up turning into 2 years. She thought it would cost her $400K to build, but saying it could be now closer to $600K. She's just not feeling so good about it, lost a bit of money, and I don't want to do that too, so I'm not thinking of building. Oh, okay, but Mrs. Smith, you could always maybe find a rental property. Well, and then decide what you could do with that rental and maybe that money, and you could decide what's next, right? Wouldn't that be helpful? Well, no. I mean, I saw queues at rental properties that are 30, 40, 50 people long. There was only 3 or 4 available, and I didn't like the look of them. So I don't know where I'll go when I'm selling this and what I'll do. Oh, well, why not just buy something cheaper? Well, yeah, I saw that, but then I was looking at cheaper properties in different areas and trying to look at what I could do with my cash in between. And the cheaper properties are actually picked up in price more than the middle and higher tier of property in recent times, and they're pretty expensive now. And also, I just don't know if I'll have any luck buying. I mean, I'm going to these open homes and they're flooded with 40 or 50 people. That's going to be really hard. What happens if I don't buy in time? Can I delay my settlement? Oh, I wouldn't want to do that. What if I'm forced to be thrown out and I have to leave? I wouldn't want to do that either. You know what? We'll wait to sell until we think it's the right time and we can find something that we want to find, whether that be for rent, for sale. Now, agents, if you're listening to this podcast, please tell me that you've heard that before, because I'm hearing that all over the place. And we have close to 2,000 agent conversations per month and growing. And these 2,000 plus agent conversations per month, this represents more than 2/3 of the most common reasons that they're not getting supply through the door. That scenario that Mr. and Mrs. Smith is going through is everywhere right now. So until the chain of construction or rent or established supply somewhere somehow breaks in a area that's popular enough to soak up the movement of others, or just anywhere in general, all over the place, we'll start to see supply come back. We'll start to see more of a balanced market. But right now, these 3 things are creating massive shocks. Now, what's another shock to it? Well, if I rebuy, I have to pay stamp duty again, and prices are so much higher. Stamp duty's higher, buying agents, selling agents, lawyers, pest and building. And if I didn't manage this as a home, it's also capital gains tax. And so even though I made these gains, I'm kind of losing a fair bit of them already, and I'm having to go back into an expensive market. And so all of these things coming together are not fun for consideration. So stock mobility, the supply issue in 3 parts, and giving nowhere for people to consistently find what they're wanting is causing a lot of sales agents headaches in trying to be able to sell properties where people actually want to sell, but just don't feel comfortable to. And look, this dynamic will change over time. It can't stick here forever. Eventually, the dollar signs will look very good for someone to go, hell yeah, I'm out of here. But with those dollar signs, it's not as simple as that. Sometimes money comes second. And it's true. It does come second. It's not the first for many things for people. Money can come second because I want the convenience of where I move. I want to feel good about where I move. I want it to be a smooth process for my family. I want to go somewhere where it's still good for my work, family, and personal preferences. Like, these are all some of the first drivers, and then the money just becomes an accompanying part of those decisions that they're making. And so this is key to remember. This supply issue will not solve itself overnight. It will take one of the chains to break, one of the dynamics to shift, And that is the biggest part at the moment that's going to cause this boom to continue on. Now, as you're listening to this, you've probably been listening to me here for just over 20 minutes. And when you're listening to this, I hope this level of detail gives you the insights that you're usually missing when you analyze data on the mainstream media. Well, they can only give it to you in 30-second, 60-second clips. So I'm not here to bash on all the mainstream media commentary. I'm here to say that it doesn't go deep enough to truly understand the why. And this is what we're doing here today. So again, if you're loving this episode, whether you're watching it, listening, or even just tuning in on the road, please jump in and give us a like, a subscribe, so I can produce more content like this and keep going through fundamentals to help you uncover what's truly happening in the Australian property market. So what's next? Well, what's next is we know migration is flowing in. Now, I've done previous episodes in the past that break down the migration boom. And the migration boom, whilst extremely strong in Australia, this chart, which is showing it, by the way, is showing huge years of migration growth that are coming into play in 24, 23, and even 22 in the recovery. These are expected to be strong for the next year or two, but it's looking to come back to more normalized trends after that. That is from forecasts of the Center of Population. I think as long as we stay the lucky country, which I've mentioned is something I believe we are, we will continue to have above long-term average migration growth, which will continue to be a supporter for housing demand in the country. Now, if someone tells you, again, an isolated trend, migration booms equal housing booms, that's not how it works, because migrants that come over from overseas typically rent. But if you go back to my housing supply component I just mentioned before in this episode, well, that is one of those chains, right? And if it's not breaking, it'll continue to stay strong and undersupplied in the rental space, because migrants will continue to come in and rent for those first few years, and then it'll eventually turn into supply soak up of established houses when they look to buy, or new houses when they look to build. So that booming migration piece is a very strong element of demand. So if you're following along and you're seeing some of the things I'm sharing with you that are creating the boom, and you want to grab your hands on a report that actually goes through 25 fundamentals, including these, well, jump onto InvestorKit.com.au and review our Australian Housing Fundamentals Review white paper. And in that, we cover the 25 detailed fundamentals across demand, supply, and confidence. I won't be going through all those 25 here, but those three are what allowed us to correctly predict the end of the inflation spike, interest rates turning a corner, and have a 90% accuracy rate in direction analysis of the markets that we said in 2022 release of the white paper, what would happen in 23. And now 23's release of the white paper is really starting to come play into 2024, saying what cities would do well by market pressure, what fundamentals would come into play. They're all coming to fruition. So get your hands on a copy of that. It's totally free, because then using that and using this episode, you'll know what's likely to happen for the rest of 24 and 25 by just tracking each of these fundamentals. Okay, so what's next? Well, I talked about at the start about the importance of economy, and economy has factored into this right at the start, from unemployment, wage growth, and then now even flowing into the economic impacts of migration. But then I've also talked about supply and the strength of what supply is doing for property markets, from established listings, new supply for construction, and rental supply. Let's go a little bit deeper into economic data. Construction is one part of economic data. Wages and unemployment is another piece. But another thing we've been looking at is infrastructure per capita. Infrastructure per capita is extremely strong right now in Australia. We are going through such high levels of infrastructure pipeline in the country. It almost feels like the dollars that we're spending are kind of like to such significance that imagine you go back in time and you're like, hey, let's go build the Harbour Bridge. Let's go build the Opera House. Let's go build these monumental lifetime structures that shape a city. That type of spending is occurring right now in Australia. And with that type of spending, do not take it lightly. This equals jobs today. This equals jobs in the future. This equals industries today that weren't here before, and this equals a pathway to more industries in the future. Whether it be renewable spendings, whether it be roads and transport, whether it be actual hospitals and upgrades, there is a lot of economic activity all across the nation right now when it comes to infrastructure spending. And this is expected to be at highs all the way through to 2028. Now, if that pipeline starts to dry up 27, 28 as it comes to it, and more is coming into the pipeline in the years ahead, then this is looking even better than ever. we track a number called infrastructure spend per capita. And actually, this is the interesting part. Many major cities are meant to have large levels of infrastructure. So whilst a $4 or $5 billion project sounds cool and sounds amazing, large cities are meant to have it. It's actually those small to medium cities that get a new hospital, get a new road, get a new dam, get a new defense project. These can be game changers for those cities because A, they're new, and B, the spend per capita and jobs as a percentage of current jobs are massive. So when you're looking at infrastructure, please don't get excited just by the billions of dollars of spend in certain cities. That is meant to happen when they're of scale and size. Make it more relative to the actual population. Break it down by new jobs added at construction. Break it down by new jobs added ongoing. Break it down by geographic placement of those jobs. For example, is this a job where someone can work from home from overseas to do or locally? Or is this a job where someone needs to dig, build, and be there locally in those areas with proximity? These are all the things we think of when we're thinking of infrastructure. And also with infrastructure, there's types. There's actually transport that reduces certain time or improves the ability of appeal to that area. The second part is social infrastructure. That can be lifelong impacts. Like stadiums are massive things because people will celebrate a team maybe that couldn't have been celebrated before, or start to actually use and see and go to these events regularly, whether it be shows for singers, whether it be sports. They bring people together. They make a city more exciting. The thing is, social and recreational infrastructure and medical infrastructure, these three things actually have profound positive impacts on markets. Sometimes certain things like renewables, as an example, can be a huge impact when it comes to spend. It can be a great impact in construction jobs, but really, how many people does it take to operate a windmill after it's built? So these are the things to remember when you're looking at infrastructure. But right now, this is massive. And so as we start to go away from economic shifts and supply shifts, and we start to go into even just the actual infrastructure and looking at migration, all these different factors that we looked at from some demand level, economic level, and supply level, what are the big X factors that are likely to come into play for 2024? And so this is the part that will excite many. So for this last part, to help you understand what's truly happening from a property boom level across many parts of the country, is actually understanding not what's going well, but what wasn't going well and if that will change. So to give you some context, in our first release of Housing Fundamentals, we said 17 out of 25 fundamentals were either strong or very strong. We also said that in that report, had you done that report a year prior before we came up with it, that would have been 21 to 22 of 25 fundamentals that are strong. And remember that 21 to 22 number that I gave was the year of 2021, which is the biggest period of price growth. And then 17 of 25, the year that I said, was actually 2022, when things calmed down a bit. And so what you can see is we're not here to just say as a property buying company that everything's a boom, everything's amazing. I'm telling you that when I say 21 of 22 out of 25 fundamentals are strong, guess what? That also means I said 3 to 4 a week, or not that strong. So it's about giving a balanced opinion. And in the 2022 release of this report, I said 17 of 25 fundamentals were strong or very strong, which means I'm saying that 8 aren't very strong. And in the most recent release of this report in 2023, when we released it for the conditions of 23-24, I said that 16 of 25 fundamentals were either strong or very strong. So again, I'm now saying 8 or 9 are not that strong. So when you're looking at what's ahead for 24, not just focusing on what's strong, which I've shared with you in the recent parts of this episode, I'm actually now going to share with you what was marked as weak in this report. The 9 things that I said last year are marked as weak. And we're going to start talking to wrap this episode up about, are they changing? Will they change? And then what happens? Well, you know what happens. Things will come back around. So let's go into the 9 weak fundamentals in that report that I mentioned. The first weak fundamental here was on the aspect of confidence. On confidence, I talked about 2 things. Consumer sentiment was weak, and as weak as it's ever been, going back to that 2023 report release. Well, guess what's been happening in the Roy Market research, which is tracking consumer sentiment? It's still not super high, but it's been increasing regularly, which means that clearly sentiment is on the way back. And so with sentiment on the way back, to simply explain it, it's people are more confident in the future, and then that future confidence equals more decisions that can be made with comfort, and the more decisions that made with comfort equals transactions. It always comes to it. So the main thing here is that sentiment that was weak before is turning around rapidly. And the trends at the start of this year clearly showed that that trend is turning around rapidly. The next thing here is the media cycle. So this is unique to InvestorKit. We actually track some of the biggest media players in the country, and we track whether their stories are ranked in one of three ways: good news stories about property, balanced opinion about property, or negative about property. And this index has been changing fast. This index actually started changing late 2023, which means that we're starting to see more and more news and media outlets talk about the benefits, the upsides, the price growth, the comeback, the improvements that you could miss out, the borrowing increases, the less reduced sales, the less distressed. We categorize this. We use a lot of back-end technology to figure out, hey, how do we put these across the three? How do we constantly keep an eye out? Because remember, whilst we all want to be savvy property investors, whilst we all want to grow a level of sophistication and improve our wealth, the majority don't, and the majority aren't. You listening, watching this are the minority. And I appreciate you for doing that, because you want to get better at building wealth for your family. But the majority, guess what? Click on the show on TV, click next, scroll on the reel, scroll on the TikTok. What's next from that media? Breaking news just caught my eye. You ever see someone, there's gym TVs, and I'm at Virgin Active and I see those TVs in the gym, and then as soon as there's this breaking news thing come up, everyone's putting their clothes on, looking left, and they're trying to get ready, but everyone's eyes on the news. I'm like, damn, this is crazy. Everyone's proper brainwashed into this stuff. Not saying there's some not fun stuff. I mean, cash cow's pretty fun, seeing the families jump up and down and they get the 10K. I'm like, woo, that's cool. But the truth is, most of it is when their attention comes to breaking news and they look at it and it's, a lot of attention grab like that. So the key is, hey, why not track it? If everyone's going to sheep along and look at all the insights in a similar way and be attracted to their opinion or decision-making by that, why not track it? Sure, it makes a difference. So we tracked it and it's changing. So that's now two fundamentals: media cycle and sentiment, that are turning back around. So now if we run this report again, 16 turns to 18. We're getting closer to 25. The next one is affordability. So when we look at affordability, we've got three layers of affordability: rental affordability, mortgage affordability, and price to income ratio. Well, price to income ratio has never been a sexy number in Australia. And it is not something to rely on in isolation to say that, hey, price to income ratio is great and everyone can afford stuff in Australia. That's not how it's been. And to be honest, across many parts of the world, price to income ratio is deteriorating because we're accepting across the world that lower mortgages are in play. When I say lower mortgages, lower cost mortgages, lower interest rates. And I think that's a whole other conversation about the cycle of debt that's been created across globally. And that whole debt that's been created has no choice but to operate at lower interest rates, because it would be carnage if they kept high interest rates forever across the globe. And that's just not going to happen, which is why you're seeing the trends start to shift, even with more smaller monetary policy shifts at that 4+% interest rates by RBA. You start to see bigger shifts in the inflation data quickly. And that's what's been happening. And that's why interest rate predictions for drops are all over the media, both at the end of this year and early parts of next year as two prominent periods. Well, that just shows the world is not built for high cost of money anymore. And so when you know that, I would put price to income ratio as the third part out of the two as a maybe for improvements. I don't think that's going to be a big improvement. Even if it did improve slightly, it shouldn't be a big improvement. And the only reason it did improve slightly is because in 2022/23, price growth calmed down a little, but wage indexes kept rising. The other two, though, will change. Mortgage affordability is going to change quickly. Right now, mortgage affordability scoring by overvalue, undervalue measurements was weak because naturally income data is lagged and income data was weak in terms of its growth in comparison to interest rate impacts on repayment. Now, income data has been strong in wage growth, but the actual data in comparison to what the repayments increased over the last few years has been way less than what's actually happened, which means that mortgage affordability eroded, right? Now, with interest rate cuts in the horizon, interest rate cycles shifting, inflation cycles shifting, this clearly means that mortgage affordability will improve because they will need to stimulate the economy again when that time comes. And that will then mean mortgage interest rates, repayments all improve. So now that's another fundamental that will eventually strengthen. That takes us to 16 going up to 18, now at 19. Then we look at rental affordability. Unfortunately, rental affordability won't improve that quickly. I'm of the opinion that, yes, it will taper off in terms of the negative impact, because even if you have tight vacancy, it does not mean infinitely and indefinitely people can just keep paying more rents. There's naturally going to be a limit, right? Yes, people will shift left, right, and center, and gentrification will occur as a natural consequence of these rental increases in many areas. What will end up happening, though, is you cannot just keep increasing because rental affordability will reach some limits. Now, I do believe that with rental affordability, whilst that won't improve massively, it should taper off. So this fundamental I'm going to still leave as weak alongside price to income ratio, but we have now moved from 16 to 19 based on the three I've given of sentiment, media cycle, and mortgage affordability. Let's have a look at the remaining fundamentals that were weak. Another fundamental was weak on the category of finance. And in finance, we have three data points: cash rate, borrowing capacity, and household savings ratio. These were rated as weak. Well, if we think of the rest of the year ahead and 2025, the cash rate is expected to come down. So this fundamental will strengthen, taking us to 19 out of 25. Household savings ratios will also strengthen, because if we eventually take away the stress on household saving ratios, which have been pummeling down, they've been hammered, right? Over the last couple of years, that's fallen off a cliff. COVID stimulus took it to 16% plus ratio savings. 8% is more the long-term average. And we got to a low of about 3% household savings ratios early this year. And that number is expected to turn and improve as mortgage interest rates come down, which leads me to borrowing capacity. Credit take-up has actually been increasing to start 2024 and end 23 already, which means even though borrowing capacities did not improve, people wanted more of it. And that clearly showed the demand coming back. But borrowing capacities improving on top of that demand coming back is another fundamental strength. And now we're moving to 20 fundamentals. So 16 went to 18 by sentiment and media cycle. 18 went to 19 by mortgage affordability, and 19 went to 20 with borrowing capacity, and now, we're at 21, actually, even better, of household savings ratio, and 22, actually, with cash rates. This is going crazy now, right? 22 of 25 fundamentals. The last one is GDP growth. That was strong. I expect that to kind of still remain weak, though, because if you've pummeled the economy with high interest rates, if you're trying to stamp out inflation, if you're trying to get this unemployment number lifted, trying to create a more balanced approach, then naturally GDP is going to be sluggish as you start to have that shift occur. It will find its feet eventually and improve again, but for now we're going to keep that weak. So we are stuck at 22 fundamentals that remain strong, with 23 being the GDP being weak, 24 being price to income being weak, and then 25 being rental affordability being weak. So before we wrap up these 25 fundamentals, I'm going to go back to the ones that were strong and just go, okay, are there any in here that I would say would weaken over the rest of 2024? Well, let's quickly shout out these before we go to my last part, which is how do we actually use this current time to build even further wealth with my personal strategies. So looking at this one here, I talked about some of the fundamentals that were weak, that were moving back to strong, but let's talk about some of the strong fundamentals to see if they've weakened in case we have to make this 22 number even lower. But building approvals, they're still low, so strong. Rental vacancy rates, still low, so they're strong. For sale listings in the market, still low, so they're strong. Let's go to price to income ratio. I already mentioned that. Rental affordability, mortgage affordability, and borrowing capacity. I already talked about that. Now we move on to bank delinquency rates. They're increasing a little bit, but they're still low and strong. Residential loan to value ratio in Australia, still very, very low, meaning we don't have much lending against the values of the home in Australia. So strong. New loan commitments, well, finance has been coming back and ticking back up, so also strong. And then going into household savings ratio, I said that would still be weak, but coming back around. So that's going to be strong soon. Household income rises, they've been strong in recent times. The cash rate improving, that was what we talked about before. Commodity prices and exports, they've fallen off a little bit. Still looking at pretty high amounts, but I'm not so confident about where this trend may go because there's a lot of things happening around the world, but this one's a TBC to watch. Infrastructure investment, still strong. But look, with commodity prices, why don't we just weaken that? Why don't we say we'll make that down to 21 instead of 22 just to be safe? Unemployment rate, it is weakening, but it's still strong. GDP growth, we talked about that being weak. And then now we talked about migration, which was the next 5 or 6 put together from overseas, regional, visitors, household size, population growth. This is all that people movement. So in 22 fundamentals, I might bring that down to 21, which means we are sitting at a strong finish to 2024 for Australian house price growth, and you can expect some house price growth to be fairly solid. Now, if you're wondering, Arjun, it's the end of 2024, you didn't get this right, this happened and that happened. Well, I would say let's look back in 2025 to these fundamentals and what the picture was to end 2024 and see if they still remained at 21 of 25, which was what my prediction was that kept the strong, or did it weaken further and that explains why it was a weak performance for the rest of 2024. I'm actually banking on this to be a fairly strong year considering these fundamentals are shifting and changing, and that's what I anticipate for the year ahead when it comes to the 2024 property boom. Now, at the start of this episode, I promised you that we'd go through my personal strategy and what I would do during these times to consider how I could see the actual growth of property impacting the decisions I could make, or even just what I would make in a hypothetical sense to see me benefit from the times ahead. Well, let me point you to one particular thing. Right now, affordable property was the big winner for the last couple of years. If an affordable property price starts to increase enough that the mid-tier and the high tier did not increase that much more, and they're quite similar, you start to see value-based changes. And what I mean by that is that the middle ring in Australia will likely pick up more to end 2024 and go into 2025. The middle and premium rings will pick up a lot more. So in case you're a little bit nervous about potentially spending more as a purchase price, I would say that that not be an issue as the years go ahead, because we've seen such rapid growth in the affordable tier that it's actually closing a lot of gaps in the mid-tier. And that mid-tier means that the affordable owners may actually upsize a lot more. And it also means that as monetary policy shifts and borrowing capacity returns, those that were forced to the lower tier can suddenly afford more and higher frequency of property. And that to me will actually mean you can start to see 600 to 800K properties and plus really start to improve their actual performance because they create separation from the lowest tier, which could mean that those negative cash flows that you're feeling or seeing that might look bad as you look at those bigger price points, they will probably get better because the rents will continue ticking up and the cost of borrowing will get lower. So that's kind of the thinking. If you were just only constrained to affordable property in the lower ends, you might actually start to open up your wings and spread them a little bit more because the price of tiers will start to shift as time goes on. So to give a couple of examples on this, I'll mention one in Adelaide, I'll mention one in Sydney, just two cities that obviously are very front of mind for me right now. Sydney, for example, in the northwest of Sydney, the distance, the geographical placement is very much different to the inner west of Sydney. But certain North Sydney, in terms of northwest markets, have increased in prices enough that you look at the inner west markets and they're not that much different. And so the inner west popularity may pick up a little bit more as an example to create more of a price gap as people move geographically to different parts of Sydney. If I was to go to Adelaide, affordable suburbs towards the south and the northeast, you might look at them and go, hey, well, today they're sort of 500 to 650K. Well, those western suburbs of Adelaide that are actually within 15 to say 20Ks or less even, the Woodvilles and surrounds, the West Croydons and surrounds, these sort of inner west suburbs in Adelaide, they're actually not that much more pricey now in comparison to the far northeast of the Tea Tree Gully Council or the Onkaparinga Council, where you've got so many properties that are maybe just 1 to 200K in terms of cheaper, but they used to be as a percentage maybe much more than what they are today. So this will start to attract people back to those middle rings over the coming years, in my opinion, especially as the mortgages become more palatable, rents pick up, and all that growth in the lower end turns to upsizes as well. So keep an eye on that in terms of the trend over the coming years. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like more detailed, in-depth raps about fundamentals and market conditions, we're going to go deeper in future episodes and keep talking about specific cities as well and certain concepts like that we've talked about here in isolation. So if you want to stay tuned to stuff like this, well, jump onto the YouTube page and like and subscribe our page, InvestorKit. Now, if you're already on here, smash the like and subscribe button. And if you're not, you listen to the audio, jump on the Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.